Welcome back, everybody, to another Sabaton History reaction video. Well, I want to say welcome to all of you. We've been getting a lot of new subscribers the last week or so. It looks like about 300 to 400 new subs a day, so welcome. Take a look around. There's a lot that's already on the channel. I often get suggestions, oh, you should check out this, check that out, and it's possible I may have already made a video for that. So if you go to the channel's homepage, you'll see all the playlists. I have a playlist for the Sabaton reaction videos, the music videos, the history reaction videos. There's playlists for all of my historical on-site content when I visit historic sites. And that brings me to the next topic, which is I'm planning on taking a trip next weekend over President's Day weekend, somewhere within a few hours of where I live in Northeast Ohio, thinking maybe the Fredericksburg battlefield, but I haven't decided yet. So if you've got a suggestion of somewhere you'd like to see me visit, then let me know in the description below. I've been to Gettysburg, Antietam, got some videos from those, want to try something a little different. But today we're going to dive into Shiroyama, which is a song that I've already looked at and reacted to. And I'll confess, like a lot of people in the West, particularly in the United States, I don't know nearly enough about the history of places like Japan. So I know a little bit about the Satsumi Rebellion, and I talked some about that in my reaction to the song. But I'm really here to learn as much as anything, and I'll react to what I hear. But I know I'm going to learn some things I didn't know already. So join me on the journey, and if you would, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already. Let's check it out.
And I'm Joachim from Sabaton, and this is Sabaton History.
The Battle of Shiroyama was a major turning point in Japanese history, where the samurai, heavily outnumbered, made a heroic stand and counterattack against the Japanese army, showing their legendary skills for the world to see in their final fight.
And our song Shiroyama is not only about that battle, but also a tribute to the ancient code of honor Bushido.
In the 7th century, Japan took a major step towards an era of feudalism with a series of reforms. Not really going to go into it here, but these not only reformed the classes, they also redistributed land among local lords, who in turn taxed much of the local population to live and work on said land.
So really there's no difference between that and the feudalism that existed in, say, England. It's just, you know, it's a different culture, obviously, but basically the same system where you have lords who are delegated authority, and then they have people who work their land on their behalf, and then of course they're probably called to battle and things like that.
The centuries, those feudal lords eventually became rich and powerful, though that was not the reform plan, and the emperors became more or less figureheads. To defend their position and their wealth, the lords depended upon skilled warriors who called themselves bushi. We call them samurai. The lords built their power bases with their own private armies, and early medieval Japan saw clans and families rise and fall as they fought for power. A new era began in the late 12th century when a clan leader named Yoritomo seized power and proclaimed himself shogun, and this elevated the importance of the bushi to a higher level. As the military arm of Japan, a new warrior caste was officially born. The era of the samurai would last for hundreds of years, and you can look up all the ups and downs of the power of the shoguns versus the regional warlords, the daimyo, for yourselves. The samurai were not simply armed thugs that pushed around the locals, not for the most part anyhow. They usually bound their lives to a code of honor and merit. One such set of rules to live by, next to the Book of Five Rings and the Hagakure, was the Bushido. The Bushido speaks of a code of morality and principles that every honorable samurai must follow to be respected and valued in Japanese society.
So again, if you're looking for a Western comparison, think knighthood, you know, that idea of honor and a warrior class that was kind of set apart and higher and viewed a certain way. You certainly have that in all feudal cultures at this time.
Central themes, next to the mastery of martial arts, are honesty, dignity, and loyalty to their master. Well into the 19th century, the samurai class, within the rigid Japanese class system, remained powerful and enjoyed the privileges given them by the daimyo. But as the 19th century progressed, the shogunate was challenged by new ideas and social reforms, and was finally toppled by the imperial Meiji Restoration in 1868. Mutsuhito, the Meiji emperor, aimed to revolutionize Japan by adopting Western ideals. He pushed democratic reforms and established a constitutional monarchy. This broke the feudal structure and sabotaged the existence of the samurai. By abandoning the old caste system, and caste isn't really the right word, but class isn't really either.
Yeah, so again, it's trying to put it, I think in the West we understand the caste system, which is primarily in India, a little better. The idea that everybody's kind of got their place in the social hierarchy, and you don't really wander outside of that or marry outside of that, things like that. So I get what he's saying. It's not exactly that, but it's a similar thing where you have a certain social structure. And notice, too, you'll sometimes hear them refer to emperors with different names. My understanding of this, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong on that, is that your emperor, so Hirohito, for example, who was emperor during World War II and for a long time after, up into the 80s, and I think he's saying Mushido is the one here, they get a different name after they've died, and after someone succeeds them, they're given like a name that takes place after they've died to refer to their reign that's different than the one they had while they were alive.
Anyhow, hundreds of thousands of samurai, some sources say up to 2 million, were suddenly out of a job, and worse for them, they were now socially equal to the common man, as the law now made all men commoners. This turned the whole social hierarchy upside down. Japan was by then under increasing pressure from the Western colonial powers. European and American ships were already probing the Far East to exploit potential weaknesses, and Japan had to shed its old skin and enter the modern era or fall behind, opening the country to modern technology and ideas.
So, he said the numbers that they were talking about, and I mentioned this during my reaction to the song. Something like 5% of the people in Japan at this time were of the samurai class. So that's a lot of people. That's 1 in 20 that suddenly have had their status reduced to the same as everybody else. And you can imagine what a shakeup that was, and what a shock to the culture of these people was, and why they would want to hang on to that. Any of us would have done the exact same thing.
By any standard, Meiji saved Japan from the fate of the continental Southeast Asian states that ended up either colonized or torn apart like China. His main foreign policy achievement was to strengthen Japan to the point that they could resist the unequal treaties. The reforms he carried out on the home front contributed to this substantially. The emperor's new conscript army, for example, would rely on mass firepower instead of individual skill with the sword, and it would answer only to the central government, with no allegiances to local lords.
And since they're shifting over to this more modernized army, and since there's not really a lot of people within Japan who have the education and the skill and the knowledge to do this, they bring in outside people. You see in the movie The Last Samurai with Tom Cruise, which is kind of he's a fictional character that's based on a real guy. I think that he was French, but I can't remember for sure. But there were real people that these characters are based on, and that movie's based in part on this rebellion that they're talking about. So just like with the Americans in the Revolutionary War, we brought in French and German folks to come in and train our army on the skills and the techniques that they needed and the tactics. They were doing the same thing here.
There were many powerful clan leaders that supported the emperor, as it was their traditional duty. One such man was Saigo Takamori. He had played a large part in the Meiji Restoration and supported modernizing Japan's military. But he also hoped the samurai could still hold on to their power in the countryside. This was not to be. And
so that's an interesting point. And Takamori is the guy that I think Ken Watanabe in the movie Last Samurai plays, again, a fictionalized version of him. But it's interesting that he was trying to be the middle ground guy. He was saying, we get it. We understand that this needs to modernize. That was a very practical way of looking at things. But we also want to be able to hang on to our old traditions, and I don't see anything wrong with that. And I'm curious to know what the reasoning was behind the Imperial Army's decision not to go along with that.
Saigo left his post as an imperial military advisor and retreated to his own domain of Satsuma, Kagoshima, on the southern Japanese island of Kyushu. Now, he was opposed to the new structures of Japanese society, but did not seek a confrontation with the emperor's rule. Instead, he kept the ideas of Bushido and the samurai alive in his own schools and dojos. Side note here, contrary to popular belief, the samurai did adopt new technologies.
Yep.
In fact, Clan Satsuma was famous for its artillery school. Okay. It was soon obvious that imperial officials loyal to Saigo were unofficially supplying his schools with ammunition and military-grade weapons, and this raised deep concerns at the imperial high court.
So it sounds to me like even though he really just wanted to hang on to their class and not necessarily oppose the military reforms, he was still arming himself and his people, which obviously is going to make him a threat to the government.
Investigators were sent out, and these openly accused Saigo of preparing a rebellion. This was an insult to Saigo's students, and some of them committed local acts of violence against government officials. By 1877, this spiraled into open war between the samurai forces of Satsuma and the Imperial Japanese Army. Saigo gathered warriors and students loyal to him and marched out of Kagoshima in early February to meet the approaching Imperial Army in the field. But he made a strategic mistake that doomed the rebellion from the start. He wanted to first take Kumamoto Castle, one of the strongest castles in all of Japan, north of his realm of influence. He thought it would surrender to him without a fight, but the officers of the castle remained loyal to the emperor. As he laid siege to the castle in winter conditions, the imperial army arrived. Both sides were initially around 10,000 troops each, and for 2 months the battles raged, mostly in close combat with swords and bayonets, and the losses were in the thousands. But the Imperial Army, under General Aritomo Yamagata, an old colleague and friend of Saigo, could easily replace conscripts by the hundreds, while samurai warriors, who had trained their whole lives with their weapons, could not do so at all.
So here's the difference, as he mentioned. You know, a conscript, you can hand him a gun, give him a training on how to use it, and send him out there. These samurai, from childhood, this is all they've known. So it's just a completely different way of seeing military prowess, and you can't just replace samurai with more samurai. So yeah, I can see why they were worn down to where there were just 500 left.
Despite their far greater skill on an individual level, the rebels were forced to retreat. Still, it was a fighting retreat, and the remaining samurai waged a relentless guerrilla war, but they could not run forever. By September, it was only Saigo and 400 of his samurai who managed to slip through the imperial lines and make their way back to their capital of Satsuma, taking refuge on the heights of Hill Shiroyama. It did not take long for the Imperials to catch up, and General Yamagata was determined to finally capture Saigo and crush the rebellion once and for all. He ordered his men, some 30,000 strong by this point, to lay siege to the heights. They surrounded Shiroyama with a complex system of earthworks, trenches, and barricades. Yamagata sent out an envoy with a letter demanding Saigo's unconditional surrender. That letter shows the deep affection and respect the imperial general held for his friend, and you can read the letter in the description.
Interesting.
Saigo, true to the nature of Bushido, could not accept surrender and denied Yamagata's request.
So, and this is still a part of Japanese culture, even up into World War II, this idea where surrender was really not something you considered at all. And that's why the Japanese fought so fiercely in these island hopping campaign by the American Navy and Marines, because you didn't surrender, you didn't lose. It was just not something that was even thought of in the culture.
See, for the samurai, surrendering was the most shameful thing they could do. A warrior was not just remembered by how he lived, fought, and served. He was also judged by the way he met his end. Death, even in defeat, could be the most honorable and glorious act of a samurai's life. And after all, death is inevitable, but giving up or losing heart in the face of defeat is not, and is unacceptable. Knowing the end was near, Saigo and his men spent their final days singing songs, writing poetry, and playing games, while the Imperial Army prepared its assault. Its artillery began to fire at midnight as September 24th began. The samurai wished each other farewell and shared a last cup of sake. At 3 a.m., Imperial infantry stormed up the hill. The samurai charged, forcing them into close combat. Now, they could not hope to match the skill of the samurai and took huge casualties, and their lines fell into disarray, but numbers were on their side. By 6 a.m., only 40 of the samurai were still alive.
So this started at 3 in the morning, so they were fighting in the dark. I would feel like maybe that at least gave the samurai some bit of advantage as far as when they got into close combat.
Saigo himself had been mortally wounded, probably from a bullet to the stomach or the hip, though that is uncertain. The legend goes...
He said that it's uncertain because there's some who say that he committed harakiri, you know, where that ritual suicide and then you're beheaded, and I think that's probably what he's going to talk about here.
That he was carried back up the hill by one of his closest friends. As they found a quiet spot, Saigo turned one last time in the direction of the imperial palace, bowed, and then got to his knees. He committed seppuku, the traditional suicide, by slicing the abdomen open to preserve his honor. His friend cut off Saigo's head with one stroke and hid it somewhere on the mountain. In the morning sun of September 24th, 1877, the remaining 40 samurai met their fate in one final suicidal charge into the imperial lines. All of them were cut down by gunfire. The defeat at Shiroyama not only meant the end of the Satsuma Rebellion, but the end of the samurai. Japan had entered a new era where such warriors had no place. From now on, the Japanese would wage war with an army made of recruits from all classes and all backgrounds. Saigo Takamori remains a tragic hero whose dedication and skill will always be remembered as examples of the best of his kind, the samurai, and his code, the Bushido.
Shiroyama, the song, obviously is going to have a certain meaning for Japanese fans and stuff. Do you guys play in Japan?
Yes, we played there 4 times since 2015, actually.
All right, Tokyo!
And what about before that?
Never.
Yeah. Okay.
We never had
It's a
the
good
timing. We
song.
always
It's a
wanted
really
to
good
go,
song.
but it just never happened.
But the song Shiroyama, that was sort of an unexpected, like, big crowd pleaser for you guys, right?
Yeah, I was really happy because I really liked the song. It's got this kind of 80s movie theme, vibe to it. Not only the Japanese, but fans from all over the world took it sort of to their hearts. So even while we were on the Last Stand tour, which Shiroyama is from, it actually made its way to the encores at the end because it was so popular. And that
And I think part of that is there is something, even in our Western culture, that's fascinating and kind of mysterious and cool about the samurai, you know? I mean, it's just one of those things that I think, at least for me growing up, always looked at and thought, wow, didn't really know anything about the samurai, didn't know anything about their culture, their heritage, why they existed. It just was kind of a cool thing, you know?
is
Really, not being a single.
Yeah,
And
not
still
being a single.
But that's what people wanted.
And from the new album,
Yeah.
So thank you for that, fans. That was
So what would an
amazing.
encore be on the Last Stand tour? How many 2 or 3 songs? What do you guys do as an encore?
On the last run of this tour, we did usually Primo Victoria as the first one could be, and then into Shiroyama, and then finishing up with To Hell and Back.
To Hell and Back.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Nice.
See, now you guys learned something that you did not know about Sabaton. Although some of you probably did know that.
Yes.
So-
Everyone who went to the concerts, actually.
Yeah, everyone's like, I went. Okay, sorry. All right. Well, once again, Shiroyama is on the Last Stand album,
And that's all for today.
but we will.
All right, so let me know your thoughts. Add to what I had to say, because like I said, I confess, I don't know nearly as much about this part of history as I do other areas of history, and I want to learn more, and I'm trying to learn more. But use the comment section below. Let me know your thoughts. Don't forget to hit that like button. We'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching.